Yeah, you can come in. Again, I want
to day 2 on our capacity building workshop on governance for organizations in the third sector. I hope everybody had a good day yesterday and a better evening. And I'm not going to be too long, so I am just going to hand over to Richard and his team so that we can get started on today's session. So thank you all for being with us again today. I hope you all have a very informative and enjoyable session, interactive as well.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Good morning to everyone. Just showing my face for a little bit, and then I'll take off the camera so that we could conserve the bandwidth. So I see we have 1 or 2 new persons in the group. I don't know if you all want to go ahead and introduce yourself and which organization you are from. I think that would be Veronica and Juliet Cumberbatch. Oh, sorry. So Juliet still doesn't have her mic isn't working. All right. But thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're going to speak about financial management. I sent a link in the chat, which is going to be our first activity for the day. So if you could click on the link. So Juliet Cumberbatch is from Chancellor Creative Center, and Veronica Laurie is the president of the World Archery Barbados. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So the first activity is asking us to rank these statements. I fully understand what financial management means. My NGO has the knowledge and tools to implement good financial management. My NGO prepares internal financial statements every year. Once you click on the link, it should be able to carry you straight to the activity. All right, so we have people still voting. We have 8 persons who voted. And from the 8 persons who voted, we have an average of persons who saying that they understand what financial management means, that the NGO has knowledge of the tools and has the knowledge and tools to implement good financial management, and that the highest average is saying that the NGO provides internal financial statements every year. Now we're going to learn what exactly does financial management mean, how do we implement it, the elements of financial management, and also the importance of good financial management and producing reports. June, what you could do is go to menti.com and use the code itself, or you could type in the chat and Christian will put in the answers for you. But we're going to move on now to Richard Jones, the officer in charge, and he's going to show or walk us through this process.
Thank you. Thank you, Curry. Good morning, everyone. We're back again. Today we will look at an important issue of governance, which is financial management. And this is likely to be the area where we may need to look at more seriously in terms of the regulatory environment. And as we will show, the trends, the global trends in regulatory enforcement on the sector itself is coming. It is happening across the Caribbean. It's happening in a manner that CPDC, as a representative body for NGOs, is not always keen on the outputs or the outcomes in some countries. However, I have to say that here in Barbados, we do seem to have a very different process, one that's consultative, and we hope by the end of the day that the environment that is created is one that we can all thrive and benefit from. Now, today we will look at, I think, start with the concept. The session explores the issue of financial management, but where does financial management reside from a conceptual frame for us as in the sector? And I'll switch off my camera shortly. Financial management for us is placed in the context of what we call financial accountability. Now, financial accountability is really important for NGOs. Why? It is firstly the management of the NGO's expenditure through the use of monitoring and control systems, but not only that, in a manner that fosters high levels of transparency to its stakeholders. So not only should you have control systems in place, the control system should function in a manner that fosters high levels of transparency to all stakeholders or key stakeholders within the organization. And maybe some that also external to the organization, such as donor partners. How does it help? So financial accountability gives NGOs legitimacy and credibility. It contributes to their reputation, adds to their sustainability. Good financial accountability limits fraud and mismanagement. What we will find, history shows us, and this is not only Caribbean, this is internationally, those organizations with an excellent reputation for financial management, those that produce regular financial reports, those that produce internal financial management statements, and can deliver these on request with a high degree of accuracy, do fare much better than those that cannot perform and do this function. It's all about trust. When you are given money, whether that is by government, whether that is from the public, whether that is from international donor agencies, they want to have a fair degree of confidence that the monies and the funding will be managed effectively. So it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we have the minimum level, at least the minimum level of financial systems in place that we can do our reporting. There are some donors, I know in the private sector, for example, that may not require such level of reporting. However, it is always still good practice for us as an NGO sector to be able to produce such reports and exceed maybe even some donors' expectations. That adds credibility, adds legitimacy to our work, to what we do. The next slide shows some of the key importance factors or features of financial accountability and financial management in particular. Accountability to beneficiaries in ensuring that the funds that you have received for a particular purpose or particular sector actually does go to that sector. Reduce and eliminate incidences of misuse of funds when there are no clear guidelines or procedures or processes for implementation of activities and expenditure of funds. It creates a level of vagueness and lack of clarity as to the process. And that in itself lends to many more challenges and issues popping up or cropping up from expenditure processes. Different people and different personnel, different volunteers may do things differently, and you may find at the end of the day that your processes are all over the place. One person does procurement by simply picking up the phone and calling someone and say, hey, I have this contract, just send me something for it, and that's it. Well, another organization may have a process where, hey, if this contract is above $1,000 or $2,000, I need 3 quotes. I can't just take 1 quote from one person. So that process of financial management helps create those guidelines and rules and standards upon which you can be assessed on your transparency and accountability systems. Make informed administrative project decisions, and that goes back, I think, a little bit to that point I just made. So when you have all of these processes in place, you know who the signatories, you know who preparing. One person is preparing, another person, a level is approving. Those systems all help you implement projects more effectively. Build stakeholder trust, credibility. Knowing that you have these processes in place is very helpful to donors, is very helpful to prospective contributors to your work. I say not only donors because you do want persons to volunteer and stuff within your organization to help. So it is not only a matter of donors, it's a matter of anyone who's willing to contribute to the organization should be able to have a high degree of trust and confidence that you are doing the work you intended to do, and it is done in a manner that they can be confident that the funds are going where they are supposed to be spent. And it helps strengthen fundraising efforts, as donors build trust and understanding that you're a serious organization. You've exceeded by submitting financial reports, let's say to private sector sponsor when they didn't ask for it. That helps grow a level of confidence or develop a level of confidence in your institution as an NGO for them to trust you with more funding in their future. So those small little things do add value and do help significantly. We go to the next slide. We would like to discuss the Financial Action Task Force. Now, before I mention that there is a global impetus. There's a global impetus for regulatory change, not only within the NGO sector, but this regulatory change and regulatory emphasis is being placed on all financial activities really globally. The NGO sector has been identified by the Financial Action Task Force as an area that needs much work in terms of the regulatory framework within Barbados and also the wider Caribbean. It is an area that CPDC has lent support to its partners. Particularly, we supported our member in Bahamas when their government was implementing regulatory environment for NGOs to ensure that the regulatory environment, as much as possible, did not inhibit, first of all, democracy and their ability to function as an institution. Now, in terms of what the Financial Action Task Force is, it is a global policymaking monitoring agency with a mandate to prevent money laundering and terrorism financing. The Financial Action Task Force sets the global standard as it aims to prevent misappropriation of funds and fraud. So this task force assesses a country's adherence to standards through a periodic monitoring exercise called the Mutual Evaluation Report, where it ranks countries as either compliant or non-compliant for each of its 40 recommendations. The recommendations made under the Financial Action Task Force are not legally binding, but non-compliance with these regulations could lead to countries being blacklisted as non-cooperative countries or territories, which is always an interesting statement. It is said that these rules and guidelines and recommendations are not binding on the state to change its laws. Nevertheless, if a state does not change its laws, it is exposed to being blacklisted by a number of countries. So, in effect, it is somewhat binding, though I think the lawyers would say it's not legally binding, but you will find in practice it would be binding in one way or another. Next slide. So we explore the regulatory requirements. The task force has developed directives in the form of guidelines and recommendations which have become the international standard for combating money laundering and terrorism financing. Therefore, NGOs are required to improve their financial systems to meet these international standards with enforcement by national regulatory authorities. Next slide. So the 8th recommendation of the Financial Action Task Force is really what concerns us and civil society in general, and the regulatory framework for NGOs and charities and so forth. This recommendation applies holistically to civil society sector globally. Recommendation 8 urges governments to conduct due diligence with CSOs to ensure they follow the FATF regulations, the Financial Action Task Force regulations. Under the Financial Action Task Force report, the issue of a lack of policies for promoting accountability and public confidence in the administration and management of NGOs was flagged. The government of Barbados has signaled its intention to enforce greater accountability within the NGO sector. These requirements will likely include issues of us submitting as a sector our annual financial reports, issues of sources of income and where we have gotten our funding from, what are the sources we've gotten our funding from. So the onus would be on us to ensure that we have reporting systems and data management systems that adequately provide this information. I will, before I go on, I will take a brief break so that we can do a little poll. I'm hoping that we keep this as engagement. Please ensure and know, be confident that any question can be asked. I know sometimes we attend these sessions and we may think that we have a question, but it may not be important enough to voice it, but feel free to voice any questions you have, and we certainly will have a discussion on them. I'll hand over to Karen just to do this poll and get some feedback from you, and we can continue afterwards.
So do we have any questions on what Richard just presented, the Financial Action Task Force? Okay, well, if not, we're going to go forward to our next activity. activity. I put the link in the chat, and if the link is not working, you could go to www.menti.com and use the code. We're asking you if these statements, if you agree or disagree with these statements. My NGO could benefit from tools and software to improve its financial management system. My NGO has a designated team member assigned to maintain financial records. My NGO could benefit from technical assistance to improve its financial management systems. Also, I am drafting an email to send to Ms. Farley with all the links that we shared yesterday and the 2 presentations from today, as well as the evaluations forms. And I'm certain that Ms. Farley will get these materials to you all. All right, so we see that from the 10 persons who answered, the majority are saying that their NGO could benefit from tools and software to improve their financial management system and technical assistance, while a little less of an average for that we have a designated team member assigned to maintain financial records. So what we're going to talk about in the coming session are the 2 types of financial management systems and how they can benefit our NGOs and enhance our transparency and accountability. Richard?
Thank you. Okay, if there are indeed no questions, we can move on to the issue of financial accountability. We want to look at financial accountability for the purposes of this session in two aspects, 2 components. One is the financial management systems themselves. As we are speaking on the issue of the governance and the governance in terms of financial accountability, we know that financial management systems would be central to that, and that one is quite obvious. However, on the broader context, we also have to recognize, or must recognize, that financial management systems and your financial reporting is also judged based on your outputs and outcomes and the nature of change the project is intended to bring. So that's why programmatic reporting is also considered to be part of your financial accountability systems. In simplified form, let's say your organization, you have $100,000 and you are supposed to do a program outreach with a farming community and 100 farmers, and you have spent your $100,000. However, you've only been able to reach 10 or 15. So those issues are then worthy of consideration from a financial accountability perspective based on the deliverables you're delivering for that sum of funding. And that's where programmatic also becomes important. And you can be judged, your financial accountability can be assessed based on those programmatic indicators as well. Financial management is more than just keeping accurate accounting records. It also involves planning, involves controlling, monitoring financial resources to achieve organizational objectives. So what is this saying to us? Keywords here: accurate accounting records, planning, controlling, monitoring. All in line to achieve the organizational objective. Next slide. What should NGOs do? Monitor and evaluate the utilization of finances to ensure funds are well spent and can readily be accounted for in a transparent manner. Financial management systems help provide guidance and regulation of NGO expenditure. Such management systems come in many forms and should be aligned to the organization's size, expenditure, size being from expenditure perspective, human resource capacity, regulatory requirements, and donor needs. And it's important, I always reference size, because size is a big factor. We're not saying that an organization that functions on a budget of $500,000 to let's say $1 million should be operating, certainly should be operating at a much higher level than one that's functioning on $50,000 or $20,000 a year. We have to recognize that difference in Barbados. Many NGOs do function with less than 100,000 and many under 50,000 as well. So your regulatory requirements, your financial systems should match the scale of operation that you have in place. However, there are basic standards that we still must adhere to. The detail and the level of intensity of it may change, however. One main component of financial management systems is the existence of financial reporting by the NGO. Whether this task is undertaken on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis, NGOs must seek to keep records of all financial transactions. These reports will be representative of income and expenditure over the allotted period. Record keeping is a process where an NGO maintains documentation to show it is complying with established internal and external regulatory frameworks. NGOs must be able to show the sources of income and expenditure. Record keeping is integral to high standards of good governance within NGOs. So financial management requires good record keeping standards within your organization. It is critical that we have a paper trail and detail of all expenditure for the organization itself, whether that is projects, whether that is separated as institutional or just overheads. We must have a detailed paper trail that we can trace and track. And not only that, not only must we have it in our institutions, you must be able or should be able to access it quite easily. It is imperative that supporting documentation, we're talking about quotations, we're talking about invoices, we're talking about receipts, is kept and maintained over the period indicated by law. Yesterday we would have referenced that this period was for 7 years. And I hope that most of us would be certainly keeping our financial documentation and information for that period of 7 years. Reporting and analysis of income and expenditure can be done using spreadsheets and other useful software applications that will enable an NGO to easily monitor transactions on a daily basis. The financial records of NGOs should be made public. However, culturally, Caribbean NGOs have shown to be reluctant to share such information openly. I reference this point because it's from our own experiences. I recall when we were attempting to do a study on the impact of the NGO sector within Barbados, national social and economic development. It was quite challenging to access the financial records. And I know culturally we tend to see competitors all around us at times. And we are reluctant to share financial information. However, the culture within our sector, and this is not only Barbados, we also experience this in many other Caribbean countries. This culture does not negate the necessity for us to be transparent, as this information should be accessible to all key stakeholders. And whether that is certainly, obviously, your board, your members, your wider trustees, if you are a charitable organization, those that you represent, the beneficiaries you serve, certainly the regulatory authorities and the donors themselves. On request of it, it should be a document that we can readily make available for review in openness and transparency. Now, what tools do we use to assist us in financial record keeping? All of us would know the Excel spreadsheets found in Office. Many of us would know of QuickBooks. Then there may be Reach Reporting, there may be Budget Pack. So there are a number of software packages that can help us in doing this record keeping process. Of course, for those of us in the NGO sector who may operate at a smaller level, Excel may be fine for us. For those of us in the sector who operate at a higher level with larger sums, budgets, then we may need a QuickBooks equivalent type software to help us manage our record keeping processes. Internal control systems. So internal controls are systems of policies and procedures that safeguard assets, ensure accurate and reliable financial reporting, promote compliance with laws and regulations to achieve effective and efficient operations. I'll go again. Internal controls are systems of policies and procedures that safeguard assets, ensure accurate and reliable financial reporting, promote compliance with laws and regulations to achieve efficient and effective operations. So we just mentioned the role of record keeping. Now, after record keeping is how do we manage that information? What are the systems that we have in place to check and balance within our expenditure process in project implementation? So these policies and procedures implemented by NGOs serve as a guide as to how project expenditure should be handled. This enhances NGO transparency by creating clear processes with checks and balances for financial transactions. The effectiveness of the policies guarantees organizations can fulfill their mandates, complete service provisions, and utilize best practices to prevent undesirable financial incidences. It is important, I think, here to emphasize not only should we have these control systems in place, it is important as well that they function in a manner that lends to transparency. Sometimes you may find that there are management systems and control systems in place, but they're not being widely used or used regularly enough or used all the time as they should. So an effort needs to be made within the sector to ensure that these internal control systems are always utilized to get the desired outcome. And I say this in practicality, sometimes it is so much easier if you have time limits. Let's say you have a grant, you have time limits, and you're supposed to finish this project in 2 months' time, and you, however, need to procure an item or procure a service, and the process of going through that may actually take you a month or so forth. So it may seem easy to just call someone, hey, send me a quotation, let's move forward with this. That may be acceptable under certain thresholds, but over certain sums, you must go through that process of procurement, and it probably will take you 3 weeks to a month, but we cannot utilize those shortcuts unless in emergency situations. It cannot become or should not become a regular course or action or way of doing business for us. We must maintain our internal control systems. Let's break down internal control systems. What exactly do we mean when we speak about internal control systems? It's at 4 different levels. The first one speaks to authorization. And it says the appropriate personnel should review or approve the transactions before execution. So this implies that authorization needs to be set and it needs to be clear. What is the process for engagement? Who approves, who prepares, whether or not there are thresholds above which a high level of approval is required. Those are the authorization systems that we all need to be clear on. Sufficient information is recorded or retained support and illustrate transactions occurred. So we move to documentation. And we reference this a little above. Documentation is needed. Record keeping, we mentioned before, and how we handle and manage this information is critical. So we have to establish policies and procedures for key areas of documentation, set standard forms for key processes, and a little later in the presentation, we'll go into some of those forms and give you some samples that can be used, and maintain records of communications meetings. Yesterday, in our previous session, we would have discussed the need for board minutes, or at least, if you're a small organization, the actionable decisions that the board is taking and has agreed to. So documentation as an internal control mechanism is important. It sets the bar for us. It enables us to go back and reference a decision that was made. It enables us to go back and check for the cost and the price of what we paid for items or goods and services. And it's critical to the review process and evaluation processes. Safeguarding assets. Physical items, cash, petty cash, fixed assets. Let's say you have land. Let's say, for example, you also have things such as laptops, you have office equipment, you have a vehicle for the NGO. These are all assets that need to be safeguarded. We have to ensure that the appropriate or authorized persons have access to these resources, and unauthorized persons do not have such access. So we say here, restricted unauthorized access to fixed assets and cash with security measures. Certainly a safe if you're having petty cash that's being stored, and that cash is not commingled with any other cash personally or with other organizations funded. Also, certainly that there is a limit to the sums of cash being kept on premises or by any individual, or if the organization does not have a physical premises. Review the list of personnel with access to the safe and storage of assets. Who has what? Laptop, should be documented somewhere. There needs to be a paper trail that shows who is holding the assets of the institution itself. Segregation of duties. No single individual should have taken over conflicting duties and responsibilities. And I would reference this as well, in that we are seeing there should be no situations where a person is conducting procurement, preparing the checks, and also approving the same check. That should not happen in any organization, regardless of the size. So we must have a separation of duties that creates that check and balance as an internal control mechanism. There should be regular review of conflicts in duties, document assigned responsibilities, so it's very clear who does what, who approves what. I will hand over to Karen to do another poll, and hopefully this time we can hear from you, and I'm sure you should have some questions on what has been presented at this stage.
So before we move on to the day, I wanted to hear what are the internal systems that you use in your NGO. I do believe most of the mics are working now.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
At the BCD, we use QuickBooks.
Huh? And what other systems do y'all have in place? So does everyone have access to the QuickBooks, or is it certain persons?
No, it's dedicated to the financial officer. Yes, one single person.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, solely responsible. Pardon me?
Okay, so only the financial officer has access to the QuickBooks. And do y'all have more than one signatory on your checks?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's good to hear. Anyone else wants to share their internal control systems?
Or any challenges or areas of work that they think they may need support in. Feel free to speak. There are no right or wrong responses or questions.
It's me again. I think because being part of and interacting with smaller NGOs and organizations, what I can say is that one of the biggest problems is audited reports and finding someone or having the knowledge of auditing the reports. I think that's one of the biggest problems that small NGOs face, in my experience.
Definitely, the cost of audits could be a challenge for smaller NGOs. Juliet from Chancellor is saying that they use QuickBooks and they have more than one signatory. Richard, you wanted to respond?
Yes, I mean that's great practice. That's best practice. In terms of the audit fees, this is something that I think that we will need to address and discuss with any upcoming proposed legislation. We would not want to create a situation, and it's something I have raised with the minister already, a concern that we need to be careful when implementing new legislation that we do not put NGOs in a situation where they will be non-compliant, especially the smaller NGOs, who may have to end up paying $5,000 or $6,000 for audit on a budget of $50,000 a year. And that has been a concern for us in terms of the cost of auditing, and hopefully there will be some flexibility for the sector, especially small organizations, maybe to produce financial management account statements instead. Anyone else wants to discuss, would like to discuss their?
Yeah, good morning, Emmanuel here. In our organization, the Media Association, we have 3 people who can sign checks, but 2 people, any 2 of those 3 can sign. That's the president, the treasurer, and the general secretary. So any 3 of those can sign, and all transactions of that nature, the 3 people that I just mentioned can sign. 2 of the 3 can sign. So no one person allowed to sign.
I think you dropped out.
Oh, I'm saying that no one person, no single person is allowed to sign any checks or documents. 2 of 3 people are, by the Constitution, are allowed to sign.
Okay. All right, thanks. Marcia Brathwaite says she agrees with Sean. In addition, it's very expensive for NGOs to receive reasonable audits. Cheryl Griffith indicated that they use QuickBooks and 2 persons to sign checks.
It would sound as if we are using some best practices here, which is a very good thing with the upcoming regulatory changes or enforcement. We will need to upgrade and update our accounting systems and our financial systems to ensure that we stay within the law. Anyone else would like to make a contribution?
Yes, sir. Good morning. I am, just a moment, please. I was just wondering, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Hi.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Well, our organization practice also with the 3 signatories, and depending on the amount, then any 2 will sign at any time. But what question I want to ask, if, for example, 2 of the officers are going out, say out of state, and there are checks to be done, is it the best practice for them to sign a check and leave for the others to sign, or is that a no-no? You understand what I'm saying?
That is a very good question, a very practical question you just asked there. The reality of it is that they may very well have to sign that check, but there are also check and balances you can put in place if they pre-sign a check. Firstly, there would need to be another signature on that check, so it can't only be a blank check being left with 1 signature that is actionable. So there would need to be a second check, a second signatory, first of all. And also, you would need to have a process that you can still contact them and alert them to the sums of that particular check and to who is being paid as well. So that is not a bad thing. Or if the information is known prior to their departure, that you actually write up the check and just let them sign there and then and the approvals and so forth. But I am assuming you are speaking about a matter that comes up or a payment that comes up after they have left, and you simply just need their signature on the check. I would suggest that, yes, they can pre-sign it. The practicality of it will demand that they do pre-sign it. You should have a process of contacting them or emailing them and indicating this is what needs to be paid, this is the sum, and at least get their email approval on it.
Or may I suggest that maybe they can actually do a copy of the check and send it to the signatory who's outside the state.
Okay, thanks very much. I know of a situation like that, but there was an arrangement made that whenever something comes up, it's an unexpected item or something comes up, then they would communicate by email or telephone so that all 3 officers would know exactly what is happening.
Yes, that's an excellent question. As the head of a regional organization, we do encounter those situations from time to time. given that key signatories would travel and would require, we still have an operation going here, so we may need to pre-sign checks. It is your additional check and balances that you need to put in place then. Emmanuel suggested that we actually send them the check, but what you really do is to communicate the information of how much funds is being spent with the checks that they have signed, and what the purpose and to whom, so that they can give you some level of written approval. I would suggest that it not be a telephone conversation alone, that there is a paper trail for such transactions as best practice.
I agree. Thank you.
Are there any more questions, or could we move on to the next activity?
I would, Karen, I would urge to hear some more from other persons. Do you have financial systems in place? Do you have internal controls in place? Is there an area of weakness that you need to improve on? Let's hear from some other persons. Roslyn is on mute. No?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, we're hearing you.
Okay. I think yesterday I had stated with Bango, we have, this is the board. We have the president can sign up to $1,000. After that, we have 3 signatories at the bank, and 2 of those signatories can sign at any time. That's our procedure.
Right. So you have signatories and you also have thresholds, thresholds of approval.
Yes, please.
Right. That's an excellent check and balance as well. Any other organization wishes to make a contribution?
June Paris in the chat says that absolutely they should have a receipt attached about talking about having a paper trail as well as on email. Sharon Roskitten says that it has to be improved upon, so I'm assuming it would be her internal controls. While Laurie says that we have 2 signatories.
Okay. All right, great. I think we got your participation there. Thank you for your contributions.
So we'll move on to the next activity. I put the information in the chat and I see some persons have started to partake in it. If the link does not work for you, go to menti.com and use the code. All right, so we have the majority of the group agreeing that it's important to plan, monitor, and report on all expenditure, and also that good financial management could increase fundraising possibilities. So let's hear your thoughts on these statements. I believe that good financial management could increase fundraising possibilities. What about good financial management could increase fundraising possibilities?
Okay, so for one thing, if, for example, a donor agent has given you a loan or a grant, and you are able to have good financial management in place, reporting best practices and so on, and you spend the money on what they loaned you or granted you the money for, then the possibility is that you'll get more money again. The converse is true. If you don't, then they will not be keen to lend you or grant you any more money. Hence, your fundraising effort would have a dent there. So people want transparency, and any organization that has transparency and good financial management, they'll be excited to lend you money, and people would donate money to your organization because they know that you are operating above board.
That is so true. CPDC had a situation with a donor saying, I'm calling you because I have this money to spend before the budget closes out, and I know you will spend it wisely and that you will be able to account for the money that you've been given. So it does happen that if you have a good track record, if they have small sums to give, they might search you out to give it to you. Yes, Marcia, I see your hand is up.
Hi, good morning. It also lends credibility to the company, because if you spend the money wisely, you know, like the other caller said, then the company would have faith in you. And, you know, of course, for future reference, they will invest money in your organization.
Yes, and Cecilia is saying, when you're doing proposals for funding, good financial management is necessary. Also, as the other said, if someone gives you a donation, they want to know how it is spent. That is very true. I know for me personally, if I give money and I don't get a receipt for the donation, I'm like, so what's going on? Or I love when I give money and then I get a newsletter about how the money is being spent. Yes, please go ahead, Imogen.
Yes, sometimes you may have a relationship with a particular donor, and your financial situation is very good, or it may not be so good. And then you may try to get something from another donor, and that donor, the second donor, will cross-check, you know. So they will ask you, have you ever received any funds from the donor before? And if you say yes, then they will check with the other donor to see what was your working relationship like. And it depends on your relationship and how you spend your money, then they will recommend you for a loan or a financial, you know, take from the other donor. So it's very important that your financial management is up to par, and that you're clear and you're transparent on what you are doing.
That is absolutely correct. Donors do speak to other donors, and when you have grant calls, you have an evaluation committee, which often has another donor on the committee as well. So it might not be just the organization you're applying to, but other donors sit on this committee and they talk about their experience with working with the NGO. Marcia, you had something else to say?
Sorry, not at the moment.
Okay, all right. What about the second statement? I believe that it's important to plan, monitor, and report on all expenditure.
Before you go on, I'd just like to make a contribution there too. We find situations as well where a donor may actually require your audited statements. for you to submit a proposal. And that in itself also limits your possibilities. And it means that you must have good financial management systems in place to be able to even access some types of funding support.
That is very true. So any thoughts on the second statement? How do you plan your money? How do you monitor your expenditure, and how do you report your expenditure?
Well, paper trails always work. Paper trails always work. And without paper trails, the whole question here will fall, the whole thing will fall apart, because without documentation, you know, it's almost impossible to know where the money is going. You could say where the money is gone, but that doesn't make a difference. It means nothing, especially to the auditor and to the people who are lending you or granting you money. They need to see documentation.
Hi, hello. I want to add to that. I'm June Paris. I want to say that the money should be agreed. There should be consensus first before the money is spent between the directors and the team before the money is even spent. So then, of course, the team knows about it, and there will be a paper trail, and there will be transparency.
That's a very good point, and it's one that we will actually cover a little later on in the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, can I add to that also? Sometimes you plan, which is very good, and you try to monitor, but sometimes because of the project you're working on, you may have to spend more. So when you're going to spend more, it's important that you report to the donor so that they'll know exactly what is happening on the ground.
And that is a very, very good example of why it's important to plan, monitor, and report, so that you're not reporting that situation to the donor after the project has come to an end. That is reported quite early, and adjustments can be made to the project.
So another question I will pose to the group is, how do you plan? Do you guys use, like for CPDC, we use the assembly as our main strategic framework for going forward. Do you guys have executive meetings? How does your planning process work?
All right, let me put it another way. I think planning is going to be critical for this sector and us as we move forward to a new and revised regulatory framework. It is something that we will have to do regardless of size. I reference the scale of that planning will obviously depend on your level of expenditure, I imagine. But however, it is something that we need to start doing as a sector more readily. And that plan, monitor, and reporting would include both at the board level, and particularly include at the staff or volunteer level, and what systems you have in place to enable you to adequately plan, monitor, and report on all expenditure.
Okay, if there's no more questions or contributions, I think we can continue with the presentation. Richard, over to you.
Okay, we'll move on to the issue of programmatic reporting. I would have mentioned previously in a slide, we were looking at two elements. One was the financial management itself, and the other one was the programmatic reporting. Organizations that have a good track record can easily access resources. Cases of funds or resources embezzled are very serious, and donors talk on who has done what, and a good track record is important. Batty 2014. I would say that this is very critical, and we have, as a regional organization, we have known, fortunately, only a few organizations. We've known a few circumstances where this would have happened in at least 2 islands in the region, and where funds were not adequately spent, and the donor agency would have then done additional due diligence to ascertain what was the status of the organization. That whole process itself of due diligence would have signaled to other donors and partners of that NGO that all was not well, and a review later led to this organization closing. So it is important that we have good track records. Some years ago, I was in conversation with one donor, and they referenced a situation where funds were given and persons went to Miami to shop with such funds. That is not in a situation in Barbados and not the Caribbean per se, but it gives us a clue or an indication, an example of what does happen on some rare occasions that donors are very wary of, that all stakeholders generally are wary of, and it's something that we need to safeguard ourselves for. So it makes programmatic reporting more important measuring stick for our financial management capabilities and capacities as well. It is important. The simple things we would have mentioned before, where you have stated this is the predetermined outcomes and change you would like to have, whether that is social, economic, environmental, and we have to spend those resources based on what was approved from a programmatic perspective, because we are going to be assessed on that. Next slide. So there has been a trend over the last 10, maybe 15 years now, where the Caribbean has been receiving less donor support. Barbados in particular is considered a high middle income country, so we are, for the most part, not prioritized by many donor agencies. Now, the few donors that do remain and support projects in Barbados, they've placed greater emphasis on the delivery of project outcomes to ensure that funds are spent and there is an impact. One thing we don't take into consideration is that many of our donors too have to report to someone for how the funding has been spent, and they themselves will be judged, and their budgets will depend on their effectiveness and their efficiency in their grant making. And that goes the ripple effect all the way back up. So we have to also be cognizant of the fact that programmatic delivery, outcome delivery is going to be critical as well to our overall financial sustainability. This requires NGOs to produce results and provide donors with ongoing feedback on the initiatives undertaken. NGOs are expected to provide reports from the first tranche of funds received from a donor. These reports are intended to provide project updates as well as verify the delivery of project outcomes. So your expenditure is also going to be judged or assessed based on the status of implementation and the status of delivery of your commitments, your programmatic commitments. Next slide. The importance of financial reports. The Act is the evaluation tool for NGOs, ensuring that funds are being utilized as approved by the donor, and by the board. They provide status updates to donors' boards on the progress of projects through narrative and financial reporting. And they improve transparency at the end of the day. They improve transparency and track record by providing willingness to connect and communicate practices, procedures, and different policies implemented. So this is the role of financial reports. Types of reports can include monthly, quarterly, annual report, project midterm and completion reports, project evaluations, project monitoring report, impact reports, budgets. So we want to have a discussion here on the elements of financial management. What are some of the basic overarching things you believe we need to include as we look at the elements of a financial management system? I'm just going to open the floor for 5 minutes or so to have a discussion. What does financial management systems mean for you and within your organization? Karen, could you facilitate this for me, please?
No problem. So we talked a little bit about the importance of planning and how do we plan. But what are the other elements of financial management systems, in your opinion? So it's plan, spend, monitor, and report. What does it normally look like in your NGO? When do you plan the money? Is it before you ask for the donor for funding, or is it after you ask your donor? What are the systems in place for you when you're spending, and then how do you monitor and how do you report your expenditure? Yes, Emmanuel.
Yeah, so what I would look at is right now there's a real situation that obtains in my media association where we were given a grant by a particular donor agency, and what they've said that if we are going to make any changes to what we said we would spend the money on, we need to ask for permission so that they could give permission and we could go ahead. I mean, that is one area of managing and reporting. And so that has been done. So I just want to raise that to show that sometimes you might get money, and instead of you just going ahead and say, well, I'm going to spend it on this, you need to recognize that there are conditions and adhere to the conditions of the donor or grantor so that you can actually keep your integrity intact.
I was talking on mute. Yes, agreed, Emmanuel. So donors have stipulations. If you do your budget and you submit it for funding and they approve it, if you want to change between the budget lines or change project activities, therefore changing the budget lines, it is part of protocol for you to request or notify this to your donor. Also there's important to have the interim financial and narrative reports, which is how you help monitor the expenditure, and then also to have your final or your evaluation report, which is reporting back to your donor the complete project activity expenditure. Yes, Emmanuel.
You hit the nail on the head, because that is exactly what you just said in some of the requirements which they wanted, which they required of us. Exactly what you said, the reporting, you know, and the final report and the preliminary reports. And so yeah, you got it down pat there.
Okay, thank you. Marcia and Imogen, are your hands up from before? You all want to say something?
Something new.
Okay, go ahead, Imogen.
Okay, so our organization is responsible for the Seventh Adventist churches in Dominica. Now, when they had the Hurricane Maria, then there was the need for building of homes. So the donor that gave the funds, even though we were planning, or let me say that the planning is continuous. You plan before or when the incident happens, you keep planning. And your reporting is very crucial because sometimes we do need to change what we planned for. So we always have to keep updating the donor so that they will know exactly what we are doing. So our organization is always planning and reporting. And I think the accountability is also very important so that the donor will be satisfied at the end.
Yes, that is correct. It is important. I had a grantee once who ran into a hiccup with his project activities. So instead of telling me what was going on, he decided to stop corresponding, which of course sent up even more red flags for me because I'm seeing time is running out. I'm not hearing if the project activities are happening. I'm not hearing if the money is being spent or how the money is being spent. And then in the end, the project was not implemented effectively and they had to retain the money, which is something that as NGOs we try not to do. Yes, Sean.
As I think three important things is transparency, understanding, and communication. I think what most people don't realize is that even after the money is spent and the project is done, I think what is necessary too is also giving the donors or sponsors an update of the money that was spent and what's still going on, even though the funds are not coming anymore. And that can be by just simply sending a card, picture, updating them on the project, what is still going on, the benefits or the challenges. And I think this will enhance not only further funds, but will also give an understanding of better communication and management of the systems that's being used.
That is an amazing contribution. So it supports the finding that we have in both our grant management toolkit and the recent research we did in domestic resource mobilization, where we looked at Barbadian NGOs and their ability to mobilize resources and the need for them to actually communicate what is happening before and also what's happening after for the sustainability and for the donors to understand that it's not a one-off investment, but that they are able to have long-term impact in the communities that they're in. And people give to people at the end of the day, you could break down, we could talk about resource mobilizations 1,001 ways, but at the core of it, it always comes back down to people give to people. So yes, definitely update. Yes, Marcia.
Yes, agree. Again, I have to agree with Sean. My other organization, we just undertook a very major roof repair project. And what we did, we got the donors to come in before we did anything and let them see what we were going to be spending the money doing. They got together and a group of the companies invested the money in our organization. So what we did, we opened a separate bank account from our account. And we had one of the donors sign on that account so that there'd be transparency and they would know exactly where the money was going. And ever so often during the project, we would call them in and they would come in, they would take photos and they knew exactly where the money was going and when it was going. And at the end of the project, you know, we had a ceremony and we invited all the donors. And then periodically, I would just send them, even though we're not receiving the money for that project right now, I would send them a report on everything that is happening in the institution, whether it's fundraising or not. And we have kept that relationship going. And the good thing about it, they've already said to me, well, yeah, for 2021, we're going to put you on our list for donations. So it's good to keep that relationship going, you know, with your donor.
That is correct. I think Rosalina had something to say.
Yes, I was going to say that I agree with Sean, and know that Marcia has spoken. It concretes what I'm going to say more, because I used to sit on the executive of the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries when the economy was more robust, and we had applied to the European Union for funding. And what we used to do as a follow-up, whether we had a project going or not, was to send our annual report. So we built a relationship with them. And out of that, when we wanted to carry out a project, they just used to say, send a proposal.
Yeah.
So that worked for us.
That sounds like a wonderful testimony to the importance of keeping attention.
If I can make a contribution, I think it is not often recognized that usually NGOs function as project management institutions. Projects are dynamic and they require close monitoring, constant feedback, and good communication, as was said before. It is imperative that we acknowledge that fact and that our systems are in place to enable us to engage those who support us in our work through that mechanism and that level of communication, and through knowing these things in advance, as Emmanuel said, so that they can communicate them quite early that, okay, this has changed for us in our project, and in response to it, we need to amend our scope for our project to adapt to this change. 90% of the time, most donors will say, okay, once it is still within the general focus of the project, it should not be a problem. But as a sector, we need to all be functioning at a level where we can pick up those things quite early and adapt to them. And we need to have both financial and project management systems in place to be able to accomplish this. And that's one of the reasons why it is vitally important for us to have these internal systems and management systems there, and use them in a manner that it helps us build that relationship with our donor partners.
Martha, you wanted to say something else? Your hand is still raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't.
Okay, Imogen?
I'm good to go.
Okay. Anyone has any other contributions on how they plan or how they monitor or keep their donor relations going? Okay, if not, we're going to take a 10-minute break now and come back at 10:45. Just a quick bathroom break. could start back just a little 2 minutes earlier. So I'm going to hand over to Richard to walk us through the elements of financial management.
Elements of financial management. We try to break down this section in a step-by-step manner that would enable you to see the different components of it. I know that many of us operate at different levels, I should say. So we try to do it in a way that even though you may be a small organization, primarily on a voluntary basis, the information should still be useful on how you go about and implement your financial management systems. Firstly, the planning stage. This is where you plan an activity or activities, you plan a project, prepare a budget, forecast project activities costs within a set time interval. This level of planning can also be applicable to the organization's work in general. So planning your key activities, let's say for the 6 months or for a year, you plan your budgets, your corresponding budgets for those activities. You forecast your expenditure levels at, let's say, on a quarterly basis, for example, so you know what resources would be required when. A key part of planning is our budget. And given that we are reviewing the issue of financial management, budgeting is really central to this process. Budget describes the money that an NGO plans to raise and spend over a set period. This enhances the organization's ability to manage their resources and expenses to ensure their sustainability. So when we prepare budgets, whether that is an organizational budget that the board has approved, or whether that is a budget from a donor, we submit a proposal, we submitted a budget for a set number of activities. The budget is the basis of analysis, is the basis for financial management as well, is the basis upon which we're going to be assessed. So budgeting is really a critical part of the financial management process. There are different stages of budgeting that we need to explore. First, the planning initiatives, activities the organization will undertake. So in order to budget, we need to know what we're going to do. We need to know exactly what we're going to do, how much workshops we're going to be holding, how much research papers we're going to be doing, how much persons we're going to be feeding. We just need to know exactly what the activities will be, and prepare a budget for those activities. The budget should be as realistic as possible. When budgeting, I would often advise NGOs not to go always for the cheapest costs, but to try to strike a balance somewhere in between on the average costing for goods and services when budgeted. So after this process is completed, you've received the resources, you then commence the expenditure on project activities. Cash flow, the availability of funds for project activities at the appropriate time intervals. Now, part of the budgeting process is consideration must be given to when you will need the funds. And oftentimes, when you have a donor partner, they will send you money in tranches. So you must know your scheduling and cash flow needs for that set time period. Could be a quarter, could be 6 months, could be almost 1 year in multi-year projects. You may very well get access to 1 year funding. You just need to know and be able to forecast adequately what your needs will be. Monitoring and evaluation of project finances ensures that project budget is managed in relation to the planned activities. So you would need to have a good monitoring process for your budgets, ensuring that you are keeping within the approved limits for the line items based on your approved grant arrangement. So organizational budgets, there are three types of budgets in general. There's organizational, there's project, and there's activity budgets. At the higher level, there's an organizational budget. This represents a full synopsis of the organization's financial activities. So for organizational budget, you can have several projects happening at the same time. Under one program, you could have administrative costs that is outside of project activity. So the other costs that you could very well include in an organizational budget is the global budget for the organization. It's usually for longer term periods, let's say a year or so or more. And the project budget is for a discrete number of activities with a specific output that you'd like to achieve. It happens at just a lower level under the organizational budget. It estimates the total budget of the project, and it needs to be updated and revised as you move on in the project. An example is given, for example, the need for revision. Projects are dynamic, things do change, and we may need to move money between budget lines and so forth. In most instances, donors would give you a set limit. Let's say you can move 10% between budget lines. Anything over 10% requires their approval. And that in itself is a process that you would need to manage, and you must have your financial management systems and monitoring systems in place for you to be able to pick this up quite early and alert the donor and seek permission. Activity budget, this entails costs associated with small activities. It may be a one-off initiative, let's say a one-day seminar, where it is a small size activity, relatively speaking, for a short duration of time as well. We provided you with a template here on project budget. It sets the context and the parameters within which your project expenditure will occur. And your financial management systems would need to take this into consideration for your monitoring and your reporting requirements. It would be based on the budget that you have established. If you are an organization that does not readily at this stage prepare budgets based on this presentation, I hope you will be inclined to do so, because it is very much needed. From the smallest of activity, you need a basis upon which you are going to monitor and plan and use the record keeping, use the internal control systems. There has to be an original document as your first reference point, and that is your budget. As we explore the spend, so we just dealt with the plan as one element of financial management systems. The spend is the second element we will explore. And we need to ensure that as NGOs, we spend according to the donor and institutional internal policies. We need to spend in line with the funding and budgeted costs. We need to book and document expenditures. This is the three key areas under the spend. Spend according to your contractual terms from your donor. Spend according to your board approved budgets. Spend in line, we have the funding and other budgeted costs. The key thing here is the reference point in the planning stages. So the spend now is based on what was agreed and confirmed in the initial planning stage, and we are now implementing that plan. If we can move on to the next slide. Some of the tools or instruments that we use in the spend, or that are vital in the spend, I should say, are quotations, for example. We do need to be able to show the paper trail of the basis on which we are spending and allocating resources in the project. Quotations are instrumental and very important aspect of that record keeping and paper trail that we mentioned earlier. Invoices as well. Before payments are made, and any payments at all are made, we should have an invoice bill to the organization, bill to the project if necessary. That would enable us to readily provide reports at a later stage and to monitor expenditure. We should not be spending resources without an invoice. Every expenditure should really have an invoice. A cash disbursement voucher, this is whether check or cash itself. We should have documentation, and as you see from the one here, the cash disbursement voucher has information, the date, the amount, the sum, both in number and words, the description, what is it for. It also has the budget area, the budget line, and the account name and number. One of the takeaways here is that it is easier for you in your budget, in your monitoring and evaluation and financial reporting processes if you do indicate the budget area in that, let's say on your budget you have an area called project staff. Then the budget area should be project staff. The line item under project staff, you have a line item 1.1 for project coordinator. Then the budget line number would go in 1.1. So there's a clear trace and paper trail on the exact nature of the expenditure relative to your planning stage. And that creates that connectivity to make it easier for you to be able to trace expenditure. We have a sample document here for petty cash. So even petty cash and small sums require some level of documentation. Of course, the information needed for small sums would not be as substantial as that in the previous voucher form, but we still do need to have this done. I see a question, is this form available from your organization? If you do require these forms and templates, we could assist you in having those available in response to the question. So these are all very simple forms that can be used. They will be available, and we will be uploading them to our website and our online resource hub in the coming, likely the first quarter next year. But if you do need them before that, we can make them available to you. They are in the presentation if you do wish to recreate them as well. So you would have access to them regardless. The third element that we're going to explore is the monitor element, which is review financial reports and documentation, enforce internal controls, and interim financial reports. So preparing interim financial reports, you're undertaking a program or a project within your organization, and each month you have a spreadsheet that's produced, a simple spreadsheet, let's say Excel spreadsheet, that's produced in Excel that gives us your income and balances on the account and your expenditure for a particular project. Oftentimes, or sometimes, depends on the donor, you would have to have multiple Excel spreadsheets if a donor says, well, we require you to open a new account. You cannot commingle these funds with existing funds you have in your organization for any other project. So they would require you to open a new account. And for each account, each project, then you may need to do a separate financial spreadsheet that would help simplify things a bit for you to ensure that there's no commingling. Commingling can lead to many issues and some confusion as well in the reporting phase. So it may be wise for you to do that, to separate the funds itself at the onset of receiving them. Enforcement controls, of course, is within the expenditure process, within the spend process and how you spend. You need to have the systems in place to adequately account for that expenditure. And we would have referenced just now the voucher systems that we had put up. We petty cash, the invoice systems, certainly the receipts that are needed as well in the spend process. Those help you to monitor and prepare financial reports that would enable you then to adequately assess where you are in implementation and be able to respond to any changes that are needed. Monitoring is extremely crucial, and you really do need to have adequate planning and adequate systems in place in your spending of expenditure to ensure that you can monitor effectively. One tool used in monitoring, if you go on to the next slide, is a financial report, for example. And you're monitoring by allocating the expended resources against what was approved in your budget. So this monitoring tool enables you to gauge exactly how much money you have left in each budget line to be spent within the organization, and you can make an assessment from then of whether or not that's realistic, whether or not you have the room of flexibility to move money around within the donor or your board set policies, or whether you need to go back to the board and the donor or the donor for approvals to move additional money around. So this is a very simple monitoring tool that is definitely extremely useful and is one that we need to start practicing if we're not already engaged in using it. Simple Excel spreadsheets that we can all create on our projects. The final element is one of reporting. This includes preparing the final financial reports according to donor organizational policy. This would also include narrative reports, even though we don't have it here, because narrative reports would enable us to see how successful was our financial expenditure in helping the organization to achieve the project objectives as well. For our purposes, however, we're focusing on the financial element of it, and the next slide would show you a similar budget that would indicate again the total spent against what was disbursed and certainly what was budgeted originally. And this provides you with that information. Yes, it can be used as a monitoring tool as well, because you're looking at total budget, disbursed to date, total spent to date, and if there are any unspent funds. As an NGO and as a project management institution, we tend not to like to have resources remaining and significant sums. It presents a headache for us in asking for a similar sum of money from a donor the next time. They may very well say, but you over budgeted significantly, so I may not really trust your budgeting processes that well. I'll give you $20,000 less just to be safe. Why? Because sometimes donors themselves, when they allocate funding and they don't spend it, in many donor institutions, they are penalized. So they get less money the following year if there's lots of money access funding left available. Karen would have given a reference where sometimes some donor agencies would recognize 2 or 3 months before the close of their financial year that they have a few $1,000s left or remaining, and they may call an NGO that they may have confidence in and say, hey, can you spend this money for us in the next 2 months? Just submit a project very quickly. Let's have this approved. The reason being is that there are penalties even for your donors when they have returned funding from us as NGOs. That being said, your monitoring process of your financial expenditure should pick up these things early. And so you should be requesting a change or additional activities quite early, certainly by your second or second report or third report in a 12-month project. So you should be able to monitor these things quite early if you have appropriate monitoring systems. And for monitoring systems to work, we have to have appropriate internal checks and balances in our spend. And we need to know, for example, when we're underspending or when we're able to achieve a budget line. Let's say you have a workshop and you have the venue donated and the catering donated, so the budget you had in originally is not really needed. How can you reallocate that? And how can you have this information and know it firsthand? Now, this takes us into the fact that good financial management also helps you and aids you in improving your project implementation. So there's not only a regulatory check on our regulatory purpose for good systems, but it improves your ability to manage your project more effectively as well. I'm going to stop here again and see if we have any questions from the participants. Karen, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Are there questions, comments? Yes, Emmanuel.
That was yeah, I don't have any questions right now.
Oh, okay. Imogen or Marcia wants to go?
Just a question on the budget. I was told once that we are not to add miscellaneous to the budget. Miscellaneous should not be an item on the budget. What do you think of that? Is that correct?
I would say that from my experience, miscellaneous is included sometimes, but the sums need to be very small. They can't be 10% or even 5% of the budget, so it has to be a really small sum. It is often advised not to do it. Why? Because you can't spend it anyway. So let's use the European Commission as an example. Yes, you can have a contingency in place in your project budget, but you need to write them and get formal approval to allocate that money. It may be easier if that money was actually allocated to another area in the budget in general, and you had the flexibility then to move around resources within, let's say, a 15%, 10 to 15% as permitted by the donor. So there may be a level of permission and feedback and engagement required for some donors to release those funds than if it was placed in the budget proper on one of the other subheadings. So it is easier in general, as I would say, to have a very small sum there. And I say very small because proper budget planning would mean that you should be able to clearly allocate all your costs within the line items of the budget itself. And you have the flexibility anyway with almost all donors to move money around. And if you need to move more than the required, the permitted 10 to 15%, then you can just write them anyway and allocate that money. So yes, it can happen, but in practice, it is not something that I would suggest.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, Richard, how about when you put at the end of your budget contingency plan 10%? Because that's very similar to miscellaneous.
Right, so that's the same thing. You don't want to do that. Even let's say you have a $10,000 project and you're putting $1,000 in contingency. I mean, as a donor, I would say, but no, why are you locking up 10% in unknown contingency? That suggests that there may be so many variables, unknown variables out there to impact your costs. It gives more confidence if you submit a project where you have $9,750 or $700 fully allocated across, and maybe only $300 at most. But better yet is if you have it all within the budget itself, budget proper, rather than a contingency or a miscellaneous cost. I know we get into budgeting. This is almost like proposal writing now.
So I'm still quite unclear. How would I deal then with inflation? Because yes, you're gonna submit the price of a service or a good, but then how do you? Because today it is one thing, and by the time the budget is approved and then gone to the donors, that good or service, the price has increased.
Okay. Now, when we start getting into inflation, we're speaking really about multi-year projects. So one thing that is acceptable, especially like USAID, is you can actually build in inflation into the second year. So you can get an average of inflation for the previous, let's say, 3 years, and you're building in that inflation into the entire budget for the second year and the third year as well. So whether that is, let's say you're putting in a 2% or 3% or 4% in inflation on each line item in the second year, that helps you to avoid the need for contingency costs.
Okay, thanks, understood.
Okay, we have a question from June. What about petty cash management? I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and explain a little bit more what the question is seeking to understand.
Hello. Yeah, I was thinking you need to write, usually from my experience, somebody writes a check for petty cash, don't they? I think, is it something that happens in all the organizations, or is it just from my memory? Right, so I'm just thinking, how do you budget for petty cash? And how do you know when to get another check to fill up the petty cash box? And are people keeping invoices from petty cash to add to the accounts?
Yes, so for petty cash management, it's normally a small sum that you keep, maybe $1,000 as your float. And as you spend that money, you attach the invoice or whatever document to the petty cash voucher, which also has the signatory for who was holding the petty cash, who's responsible for the petty cash, and then who's receiving it. And then once that money is finished, you write a check to top up the float. But well, it's the same thing where you're supposed to have your invoices and your receipts for it as well, or at least have it might not be as sophisticated as the stuff we showed before for invoices, but have some form of documentation to show that the money was spent and what it was spent on.
Right. Thanks, Karen. The petty cash form itself would have a signature. So it is almost a receipt. Now, petty cash is not supposed to be something that you're using as a key way of undertaking project expenditure or organizational expenditure. It is for those small items where you're spending, let's say, $40 at a time, maybe $100 at a time for non-recurring costs. So it is that funding that's on hand, but you need stationery, you order it and it comes, and you need to find $40 or $50 or $60 or $70 to pay for that stationery. So it has to be managed for those needs of the organization that pop up from time to time that cannot be adequately planned ahead of time. In terms of documentation, yes, the signing the document itself, the voucher form, is a receipt in its own right, but you should try to get receipts from everyone. Even if you keep a receipt book along with the petty cash, an external receipt book, so people can write it, they can write a receipt and give it to you, proving that they have received the funds. That would be advisable. But you should not really have large sums of funds allocated to your petty cash. You begin to run the risk of it being used as a normal way of expending money by the organization, and you really don't want to be moving or working with that much cash, because it becomes a little more challenging in creating that paper trail for the organization. So certainly you would want, as most NGOs would not have $1,000 petty cash. I think large organizations may have $700 or $750 or so, but small organizations may only have $300 or $400 on hand as petty cash. But the important thing is that it has to be traced, it has to be tracked, and where possible, get receipts still for those small sums. It may not always be possible to get receipts if you're spending $20 on an item or a very short-term service. But the best practice is that you really want to have supporting documentation as much as possible for petty cash.
Okay, and we have a question from Sharon Kittens. Can donors adjust your budgets? I will let Richard answer this one.
I would need to know a little more on the question. Well, yes, donors can adjust your budgets if, on a number of reasons. If you're not spending as much, they may call you into a meeting and suggest a reduction of overall budget. If you have requested it yourselves, they may very well agree to a reduction, or if they have the additional funds, they may very well agree to an increase. I would need to know the details more to really have an informed, provide an informed response.
Okay, and Marcia has a hand up. Marcia?
Is Marcia speaking while muted?
I'm not sure. Okay, Marcia's not responding, but Sharon would.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening there. It's just going back into raising the hand all the time. My apologies.
Oh, okay. Sharon Rose Kittens was saying that there's no more details to share, with just a thought in line of the change in marketplace.
Understood.
Okay. Are there any more comments or questions? All right, if not, I'm going to run through our financial management toolkit that you will also be getting the link for in the email that Ms. Farley will be sharing off. So this is a toolkit that was created in 2019 that looks at the different areas that Richard just spoke about in more detail. So it's with the principles of financial group project budgets, monitoring your budgets, financial recording, financial reporting, internal controls, and as well those templates that you all were asking about. So it shows you the different steps, how to mitigate waste, how to manage scarce resources, and the different elements that should be put into place to ensure safekeeping, the steps for developing a budget, which staff should be involved, how to align it with your income, and the plan for the unexpected, how to create a realistic budget, and also different case studies within the toolkit. It also gives you a brief description about how they may look using the various softwares, and what is an allowable cost from an unallowable cost, and how to go through the process of procurement, which we're going to talk about shortly, and also the steps for internal procurement, how to manage and monitor, how the cost should be subgrouped to create your budget lines, tips for monitoring your budget, how to look at your cash flow and forecast every month, elements of strong financial recording, the systems in which it should follow, the process in which it should follow, your revenue cycle versus your payment cycle, accounting software, bank reconciliation, and how to streamline your management. And then, of course, most importantly, that we keep referring to your financial reporting. The internal controls that we spoke about, everybody said that they have two-person signing, but there are also other internal controls that we could look at and that we could look to seek to strengthen our NGO. Also talks about best practice for petty cash, which was a question, and then it has all the templates that you could find so that you could create these documents for yourselves. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, Rosalina.
It is not part of the agenda that I see here, but Richard, would you consider inventory as part of financial management? Because I need to know more about inventory because that is part of my portfolio at the shelter. I've made up my own things, but I need to know how to do it formally.
Yes, it would be from an organizational financial management perspective. That I assume you're talking about inventory of assets for the shelter.
Yes, inventory of assets, because we normally have to submit a value to the insurance.
Right, yes.
Also, inventory of goods, because remember that we also do food distribution to the clients.
Yes, so my answer would be yes then. It would have to be treated as an asset of the organization, and the rules in the presentation or the guidelines for assets would have to be followed.
Okay, so how do you go about, is there a formal course? As I said, I've made up my own stuff, but is there a formal course?
How do you mean? I'm not sure what the question
She wants to know if CPDC provides training on inventory processes.
Yes,
No,
Gary.
not normally, but yeah, let me put it this way. If we're doing a financial management workshop for NGOs in particular, this workshop is more or less about governance in general. So we're not going into the details of it as we would have this financial management manual here would go into level of detail. Yes, it is an area that can be covered then. But we haven't done a financial management workshop for a little while now. It is likely that we'll be doing one next year. So on a workshop like that, yes, we'll be able to provide that support to you.
Okay, I look forward to that.
Yeah, but if you have a one-off question, you can just email me and I'll see how best I can probably be of assistance. But in terms of the longer term training programs and stuff, that will likely be in 2021.
Okay. I will email you in between there then.
Okay. All right, so this manual is available online on our online resource hub. I would have to say that we do have quite a bit of templates and tools that can help you in our online resource hub for capacity building for NGOs. So feel free to visit and see if there's anything that you can use. I believe we are also going to be sharing the links to directly access this document as well, which should help in your planning and spending and monitoring and reporting your financial management systems. All right, I think it is good time for us to move on to the procurement framework.
Before you move on, please, Richard.
Sure.
This reminds me of another, inventory reminds me of another area that NGOs sometimes neglect just because there's no formal way in which we can account for in-kind donations. And in my experience, in-kind donations in one particular year accounted for about 20% of the total donations. So sometimes it is a really significant number, especially for things like school programs. We would get donations in kind, in pencils, rulers, geometry sets, all those things. And when you have thousands of those things, it can really add up to a big number. And there is no formal, there's no way that accountants can agree on whether we can include this or not. So I just wanted to hear your take on in-kind donations.
Yes, in-kind donations do not usually require a paper trail of documentation. Most donors would just ask you for a very basic proof. CPDC has developed an in-kind form. So we are in ourselves, in our projects, when we do get that in-kind support, we have a voucher type form that records the service and the value of it as well. So we actually report our in-kind, and we have a form that the person donated actually signs off on as proof as well. So we create a paper trail for that as an institution, and it is something that I think it is something that NGOs in general should do, because Donna, you're quite right. Quite often, a good part of our projects are not recognized fully. And we need to find a way to also recognize that contribution to our budgets on an annual basis, or our project budgets in particular as well.
Richard, this is very important because I think that to be real, it is a possibility that some organizations might take the donations in kind and sell them and get money from them. So I think that even if the donor does not put a value to it, we should request a value to the item. But I think it's something that must be factored in for sure.
I agree 100% with you, and I agree that we do need to be able to report this 100%. It is a best practice that we record all of those cash and in-kind donations as much as possible. And your point is taken, and that point goes to also inventory as well, because if you're receiving books and pencils and those things, you should really record that as part of your inventory, and it then has a cash value to the organization. That helps track that that asset within the organization via a paper trail to ensure that it does not go to other places where it's not supposed to be going to. If money is donated or books and pencils and pens are donated for after school program or so forth, it should be going to that for that particular purpose. So I agree with that point 100%. I have to check to see if there are any chats. Is there any messages in the chat so we can move on?
No. Well, Victoria indicated that she had to leave. Veronica, okay. Sorry. Okay. But we could move on to the presentation.
Right. Let's move on to what will likely be our last session, and we'll briefly take you through procurement and the importance of a procurement framework. And I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible, given that this is not a procurement workshop per se. But I just want to give you an idea and context of what are the basic procurement considerations that you need to make or to know in your organization as you expend donor funding. The first slide more or less defines procurement. It's simply as the process by which an organization lists and identifies ways to acquire goods and services or commissions work to be done on its behalf by an external supplier. So this is how we buy goods, and this is how we buy services. And this good or service, next slide please. Services used to procure of any type, administrative services, program services, financial services. We're talking about research, audit, cleaning, catering. All of those would fit under a service type contract. Supplies is for goods mainly. So computers, telephones, food, projectors, stationery, anything that is considered to be a good. Some key considerations when you're looking at creating your procurement frame. And just bear with me as I go through these points. I'll try to put it together in one slide so that you can see how it can lay out and make sense to you in a graphical manner. But first of all, contract thresholds. Now, thresholds are extremely critical. We spoke before about one organization indicating here that, well, anything under $1,000, one person in the organization can sign by themselves. If it's over $1,000, then there's a different level of authority that's needed. So procurement is done pretty much in the same way, the different thresholds. Under $500 US, let's say for smaller organizations, maybe under $500, you will get a direct quotation. So all you need is for one quote, and that's enough for you to buy. That would be permitted, and it is not frowned upon in the procurement process at all, but good practice would still suggest you get 3 quotes. So let's look at the $501 to $5,000. This is where you may say 3 quotes are definitely needed. Now you can then go and say $5,001 to $10,000, let's say, and for that you need 3 proposals. So the level and detail of submission is increasing as you go up. Procurement method speaks to how you're going to procure the good or service. Is it going to be a direct purchase? Is it going to be a competitive bid? Procurement activity is quotations needed. I would just reference that. 1 quotation, 3 quotations, request for technical and financial proposals, and the requirement for more and more information increases naturally as the funds, the budget allocated to the procurement required, or procurement of the good or procurement of the services also increases. So as the budget increases, the need for information also increases naturally. Time frame within which the procurement notice is published. Now, for when you get into to serious project management and working with the larger donors, let's say the European Union, the USAID, even some the high commissions and so forth, you may have to also adhere to publication of notices. So you may have a quotation. Let's say you're buying a photocopier, and that photocopier is costing you about $4,500, and you require three quotes. You publish a notice, and you invite potential bidders to submit their quotations, and you say, okay, if it's under $5,000, then they have 3 weeks to submit it. Once again, the time requirement increases as the budget size increases. Time frames for goods and services to be procured. And this is more or less the time that you're allocating to the prospective bidder to submit to you. Next slide. The type of notification. How are you going to notify or send out your notice that the bid, you're open to bids? Email, letter, newspaper ads, online notifications are all methods that can be used. The evaluation process, is it a 3 to 5 person committee, which is definitely required when we're talking about larger sums. For smaller sums, under 500, it can be the CEO or the chairman of the board. Certainly for sums, maybe under $5,000, it can be both the chairman and the CEO or a member of the board, a committee of the board, or under 5,000 could also include your financial, your treasurer, along with the senior member on the team who revises or reviews, are responsible for your accounting and financial management systems. Assessment process looks at cost and technical analysis. What is the method by which you're going to assess the bids? Is it the best value, for example? Is it primarily based on the costs? So those are all considerations that would need to be made. The contracting purpose, and on what basis are you going to engage in a contract with the successful bidder? I should say engage in an agreement, because it can be a contract or it can be if it's a small procurement, it can be a quotation signature as well by the person or persons authorized within your organization to do such procurements. Then there's some basic templates you can have, which is a template for a successful bidder and templates for those who are unsuccessful. Once you create these templates, they can be used over and over again. So the key thing is just to have the basic templates in place that they can be reused for each procurement process as needed. So if we then put this all together, it may make a little more sense in the context of this graphical presentation here. So we see contract thresholds. We see here, if we read the first line, under $500, it's a direct purchase, which means you can directly engage with one vendor. Procurement activity, only one quotation is needed. Time to publish notice, so you're putting a notice out for at least 5 days. The time frame for goods and service providers to submit quote is within 10 days. They have to submit the quote. The type of notification publication is an email or a letter, could be online as well. The evaluation process is the head of the organization. The assessment process is the cost and technical analysis method of analysis of assessment. The contract process is a quotation signature, given it's a small sum, and the templates that will be needed for this instance is the email notice template, the quotation, the cost and technical assessment template. All of these things are templates that you can create once and reuse over and over again throughout this process. I hope this part of it is clear. It's clear to you. I can take some questions on it in a minute. I just have a few more slides we would want to go on in terms of the procurement process before we do take those questions. So procurement can be made using 5 methods: open procedure. In open calls for proposals, it's international or local, all vendors may submit a proposal. Bidders are required to respond to the call within the allotted time frame. The contract is given maximum publicity by publishing a notice on the organization's website, and if it's a really large contract, as governments do, it may have to be published on international contracting websites as well, and bidding websites. Now, restricted procedures. In restricted calls, a limited number of vendors may be asked to submit a proposal. The invited candidates will be assessed by the evaluation committee. So in this situation, you're not publicly notifying, you're inviting 5 companies, and those companies are competing with each other for the contract. So let's say in Barbados, we want to buy office equipment to outfit for a new project. We can identify 5 companies that provide that office equipment and directly engage them, write a letter inviting them to submit a quote or a quotation for the goods and services to supply those goods. Competitive negotiation procedure. So this is usually a request for proposal. So you open it up, you receive your proposals, and you've identified through your evaluation process, your evaluation committee identifies one individual or one company, and you then negotiate with that one company, whether you're negotiating your price for the price or negotiating for the scope based on your technical proposals. However, if you're negotiating or looking at issues of the scope and parameters, you cannot adjust that scope too much beyond what the original proposal was. So there are some limits to that. Saying that, you cannot simply alter the technical specifications of the bid, which would be unfair to the other bidders. Only due to the fact that a person has submitted a lower cost. So in a situation where you want to build a school and the school has to be on X, let's say an acre land, and however, one of the bidders submit a much lower cost for half-acre bid, that cannot be considered as valid. You can't negotiate with them that significant a space. You would have to select someone whose cost may be a little higher, but also much closer to the 1 acre specification that's needed. Non-competitive negotiating procedure is where you get to identify on the set money threshold, organizations may purchase goods and services through non-competitive negotiations when it's determined by management that competitive negotiations are not feasible. Now, non-competitive is used in situations where there is usually a monopoly by a company on providing a certain goods or services. It's also used sometimes in emergency situations as well, where there is an urgent need for that good and service. Non-competitive may also be used, not very frequently though, in what we call framework agreements. And the framework agreement is where you have identified your project will require certain, let's say, services. So you put out a call asking all any consultant interested in providing these set services to submit a proposal of application. Now, when it comes time in your project implementation to acquire that particular service, you can select from that list only and negotiate with them a contract. They would have already gone through the assessment processes and met the minimum requirements to be a contractor with your organization, and you're therefore identifying them at a later stage and saying, okay, this is a project evaluation service. This project evaluator has submitted previously. They've been assessed as valid, and we're going to negotiate a contract with them. And that is how non-competitive negotiating procedure works. And I try my best to simplify these processes. You could ask me questions at a later date because sometimes they may seem to be a little complicated in nature. So if there are any questions you have, please feel free to ask. Now, small purchase procedures is, as it says, is for small purchases, relatively simple and informal methods of securing services or supplies that generally do not exceed a particular threshold. For the European Union or Commission, I think theirs is 2,500 euros, under which one quote would be needed. For other organizations, I believe US aid may be 500 or 1,500 US dollars. I can't recall off the top of my head, but there's some donors that may be 500 US dollars, other donors may be 1,500 US dollars, where they say, okay, we're going to permit you to just get one quote. It's a very small purchase. So the level of detail and documentation and the rigor of the procurement process will not be intense, an intense one. With that, I'm going to just pause here and ask if you have any questions on the procurement process that I can help clarify for you.
Donna, you have your hand up?
No, sorry.
If you're not clear on any slide I just would have presented, please let me know and I can review it again. No questions, no queries? Okay. To wrap up the presentation, before Karen does a final review, I just want to leave with you some of the key documents when we're talking about financial management and financial management systems. I just want to leave with you some of the key documentation we need to bear in mind when we're talking about good governance from a financial management perspective. So voucher forms, audits, financial reports, financial procedures manual, or at least a framework, donor contracts, budgets, bank reconciliation form, bank statements, procurement frameworks, project evaluation report, requisition and purchase orders, quotation or bid evaluation forms. And these are just some of the documents. And as you delve further into this project, this session with your projects, you may want to review and look up research some of these areas and some of these templates that are readily available online. I would also suggest and recommend you explore our website and our online hub for additional resources that you would be able to use to help improve your governance and financial management systems within your organization. I will hand over to Karen, who will do a final review, after which we can take some final questions and do a wrap up.
Thank you, Richard. So, time for our final Jeopardy. So just like yesterday, we're just going to go through the questions and y'all can have a chance to answer the questions. So for financial management for 100, the process that enables NGOs to provide adequate reporting on income and expenditure that helps build their reputation and sustainability. What is financial accountability? These systems of policies and procedures that enable NGOs to safeguard assets, ensure accurate and reliable financial reporting, promote compliance with laws and regulations, and achieve effective and efficient operations. What is internal control systems? The process of documenting income and expenditure over the allotted period. What is record keeping? Good governance procedures. The document by which the organization lists and identifies ways to acquire goods and services or commissions to work to be done on its behalf by an external supplier. What is the procurement plan or framework? A request for proposals being widely circulated to assess individuals or companies to provide goods or services. What is the competitive method of procurement? An NGO's process of identifying prospective individuals or companies to provide goods or services for a small contract sum. What is the non-competitive method of procurement? This requires NGOs to produce results and provide donors with feedback on initiatives undertaken. What is project reporting? This report is usually done at the end of the project and is used for collecting, organizing, and analyzing a particular project activity and outcomes. What is the project evaluation report? This report is a summary or collection of unaudited financial statements, such as balance sheets, income statements, cash flow statements, issued by organizations every 3 months. What is quarterly financial reports? Oh, thanks, Charlotte. The chat didn't light up for me. Yes, you got some of them right. Congrats. Yes, the evaluation report and the financial report. And non-competitive, yes. All right, thank you. I think Emmanuel had a comment.
Oh, no, I'm just wondering if you're going to get these presentations.
Yes, I have my email written up and I am waiting to press send when we're finished with all the links to the various toolkits that we referenced, as well as the evaluation forms.
Okay.
Anyone has any other comments or questions?
I just want to thank Mr. Jones for the information. I would say it's very informative. I've learned a lot. And I think these are information tactics we can use for all of our organizations to push it forward for the future.
Rosalina?
Yes, Karen, I just want to say that, as I had previously said, that Bangor's board, we have done similar training for the board. However, for the rank and file, the general body, there's an intent to do similar training in the first quarter of next year. And any organization that is present here, you don't have to be a member of Bangor to join us. My email is in the chat, so you can email me and I will have you join into our general chat if you so desire.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thanks to CPDC and Jeff and the ministry for this valid information. Even for those who know this information, a refreshment course has been, as a refreshment course, it has been great. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Imogen, for saying that this has been a very informative session. Very informative and engaging session. Currently, our organization is not fully engaged in the budgeting element. Sharon Rose. Okay, Richard, you want to?
Yes, before I hand over to Rhonda, I just want to say thank you certainly for your level of participation today. CPDC will, in 2021, have some opportunities coming up to do training, to provide technical assistance, and even a few grants in a number of the issues and areas that we discussed. So please look out for these opportunities. If you do have any questions and need a short answer or a brief answer, feel free to give myself, Karen, a call. We'll see how best we can be of assistance within, as best as we can, given our regional mandate as well, but we certainly would try to be of support. I thank you for attending. I thank the ministry as well, and the Small Grants Program, Jeff Small Grants Program, certainly for their support in making this a reality. I'm speaking both as a facilitator as well as an NGO representative who would recognize the need for such training activities within the island. So have a good day, everyone. Take care, and I'll hand over to Rhonda.
Hi, thank you, Richard. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to both you and Karen for a very informative 2 days on governance, for assisting us through the Just Small Grants Program. So I know that David is not with us today, but I want to really send out a thank you to him for partnering with the ministry on this, going forward with these capacity building workshops. So we hope to continue these for the organizations in the third sector sometime next year. So for the participants, thank you all very much for participating. I know this is the second one in the second month. We started last month, but thank you all very much for participating with us. And I hope that y'all would use the tools and the information that would have been provided on these past 2 days to improve your governance structure where you have to. But as Donna said, you know, it might be a refresher course for some. And we're still looking out for information, feedback from the organizations in terms of what type of training y'all would want to see, so that we at the ministry too can try to accommodate the organizations where we can. So I just would want to wish you all, each and every one of you, blessed independence, Merry Christmas, and all the best for 2021. I think I'll be in touch with a couple of the organizations, but for most of you, I probably won't hear you until next year. So thank you all very much again for participating, and all the best for the remainder of the year and for 2021. Thank you on behalf of the Minister and the Permanent Secretary and all of the staff of the Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership Relations. Thanks.